Welcome back to the Hub Free Primitive Jewelry Studio. I'm William, and on our last video we made a cabochon, and this video we're going to set it and we're going to make a little pendant out of it. So first thing we do, we've already created it's a finished product here. We're going to take bezel wire, very thin, very soft, and we are going to wrap the stone, and you take a marker made a small mark on this. You have to hold your snips in the proper angle, because on one way it cuts a straight line and in the other it bevels. So we're going to get rid of that bevel. So you always cut it a little bit long, and you see how that overlaps. So we now want to cut that excess off. And this time we're going to cut it so the bevel is the waist. We want it to have just a little bit of slop. Right now, that's a little too much. I'm going to take a little bit more. There. So this is like taking two pieces of spaghetti and putting them together. You're going to push and pull so that these line up like that. And then we come over to our soldering table and flux and soldering wire. We're going to join these together. This is the tricky part, is you have to make sure it's perfectly aligned. So we have them together. Put just a little bit of flux on there. There are different hardnesses of solders, depending on how many solders you can have. The hard solder it takes the most heat. As you work down with the softness of the solders, it allows you to make multiple solders without melting the prior ones. So we're going to take just a smidgen, not even a 1/16 of an inch. So always keep track of which solder that you're on. Solders are marked 75% silver, 65%, 56%, and it goes all the way down to 50%. So you have just a little snippet of the hard solder, because this is going to be the first solder that we're doing. And you put it right next to the joint. And we're going to apply heat to it carefully. You'll learn how to adjust your flame with practice. And you keep your eye on the solder while you're doing this, and then all of a sudden it will disappear, and that's when you take the heat off. We have a nice strong solder. And what we want to do, this will show up as on the finished product if you don't file it down. So we're going to file it smooth. Nobody likes to see a solder joint in their finished piece. So you go over the coarse file first. You're going to come back, fine file, then sanding sticks. Always getting finer and finer and finer. You want that solder joint to be invisible. 600 grit. So I've done 2 files and 3 sandpapers just to get it smooth so you can't see it. So now we go back to the stone. So now we've got basic shape. We're going to back on the stone. This is called a burnishing tool. It has no sharp edges. And we reshape the wire, the bezel wire, to fit the stone. If you look at the back of it, there's hardly any gaps whatsoever. Now we're going to put it onto a backing. I use 20 gauge sheet silver. It works well for me. Some people use 22 gauge, some people use 18. And what we're going to do, I'll tell you what, let's put a little pizzazz around it. Let me soften this up real quick. Annealing your wire, heating it, makes it nice and soft and malleable. So I want to start with a good fresh end here. And this is just 16 gauge wire that you take and you twist together to get a nice decorative twist. Take your round pliers and we're going to try and shape this to meet the contour of the stone. And this is practice makes perfect. You do enough of these things and you get better and better. So now, just like the bezel, we're going to wrap it around and we're going to cut it a little bit large again. I'm going to anneal it one more time because it's pretty stiff. Anytime you bend, twist, hammer this wire, it becomes harder, more brittle. So we want it nice and soft, so it'll bend with ease. So we've got our basic shape. We want to get it as close and as tight as possible. You keep cutting off just a little bit at a time till you get just the right length that you need. Okay, we are within just a skosh. I'm going to file it again real quick. You have to make sure that these two, we're going to do it just like the bezel wire. And the tricky part here is to make sure that the twists in the wire fit. Okay, so we have gotten this about as close as we can get it. We're ready to solder it. And again, back and forth, back and forth. And what you want to try and do with the wire twist, you want it to look like it's one piece. Pretty darn hard to hide the solder joint on here, but that's what we have to do. So we're going to use hard solder again, and I freehand this. And I make sure my solder gets a little bit warm also. And you want to wait till you start getting that silver shine. I'm bringing my solder in and out so it is close to the same temperature. And you can see the silver showing up. And I just touched it for a second. And we have a good strong solder. And no real jaggedy edges. So we'll go and make sure that this thing fits. And what we'll do here, so you can see, is it still needs a little shaping. Keep the bezel on the stone while you're doing this, that way you know the bezel does not lose its shape. Okay, so what we have here, about as equidistant all around it as we can get. And this is handmade, so we're not trying to be exactly perfect. One last tweak, I saw something I didn't like. Okay, so now you'll always get extra pieces of silver. And you want to save every little snip because you'll melt it down later. So we know this is going to fit now. I have to stamp it. So I use my metal stamp. And I put my company initials, HCPJ, and then 925 to signify that it is sterling silver. Some people stamp it, others don't. Critical tool. Get everything nice and flat. And of course we want the stamp to show up on the back side. So we are going to put flux all over the back. And we can take the stone out now. Okay, so the flux will almost act like a glue when we heat it. It'll bubble up and it'll hold everything in place. All right, we're going to switch to medium solder now because we do not want to melt the hard solder that I used to put those others together. And I like my solder, it comes round. And what I do is I flatten it out. So it doesn't roll it around. And I'm going to put in 5 pieces of silver on the inside, or solder, and I'm going to put 6 on the outside. So I need 11 pieces. So I cut the 11 pieces of solder. I put 5 on the inside, which is to secure the bezel. And I put 3 on the outside on each side. Now, 9 times out of 10, I have to solder everything twice. Sometimes even 3 times, because the bezel itself fits nice onto the flat silver. The twisted rope wire, if you will, does not. So we're going to make our initial solder, and then I will use a tool and I'll tamp it down and should be able to get it all on the second solder. And you want to start and keep going in a nice circular motion. This bezel wire is the most fragile thing out there. So you do not want to have that flame set on the bezel at all, because it'll melt like that. And then you just have to start all over again. We don't want to do that. So we just keep going around and around. We try and heat up everything evenly. And you'll be able to see shininess. And the background, the flat plate, will start turning a rosy red. And you know it's getting up the heat. And then you look for the internal solder to melt. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the camera. But it goes real quick. And everything turns. You have a melt point and a flow point. So it's already started to melt. You can't see it from your view. But it hasn't flowed yet. Starting to flow now. First thing I want to make darn sure of is that the bezel gets soldered. And this outside wire is a little tougher. So we're going to quench it now and look at it. And you want to inspect to see that the twisted wire is soldered to the plate. This is soldered pretty well. So is this. So is this. So I'm going to have to solder this area again here. And I am going to tamp it down a little bit. Again, I'm looking to see the interface between the twisted wire and the flat, and we're in good shape. Okay, so we've got this. It's a mess, but it's all soldered up. Now we're going to cut off the excess before we go and start the grinding. When I'm done with all the cleanup here, then we'll put it into an acid bath, which will clean up the silver. The acid bath is hydrochloric acid, a very mild solution, and it's in a warming pot. It will work when the acid is cold, but it just takes 2-3 times longer. So if you want to set something in the acid pot, pickle pot, and they're called, then you just have to wait overnight. So now we got the rough shape, and I'm going to use this belt sander here to take the majority of the excess silver off, and it is loud. But this is the biggest time-saving tool that I have, because filing takes forever. A little bit more there. This thing creates so much heat, the friction, you have to wear gloves. So now, because it's a very coarse belt sander, we have to make sure everything's smooth. You start with the back side because there's always a burr left by the belt sander. And we're just going to go all the way around and make it as smooth as we can. We'll do 2 files and then 3 sandpapers again. Okay, so we're getting down to the end. You want to go over everything. Real well and feel it. Nothing beats your eyeballs and your fingers. You're looking for any deformities. And certainly any rough spots. That's the worst thing that can happen, is leave a little tiny piece of metal out there. Okay, we got this together. This is going to be a pendant, so we want to put a loop on it so that you can hang it. So I do a fairly simple one. I take my round pliers. Just make a round circle. I'm going to cut it off. And the metal has to join. A little bit of hard solder. Always start with hard solder for your first one. That way any subsequent ones, you're going to use a lower melting point solder. I'm just going to put that up there. Okay. Try and make sure it's nice and round. So this is going to go onto the back of here. We want to flatten this wire out so that it has more surface area. Okay, doesn't want to sit correctly, does it? So we use what's called a third hand. We're going to take this, and that's going to hold it in place. Okay, so we've made this third hand hold it steady, and we're going to switch to soft solder now because we've used hard on the original bezels. Then we used medium to attach them to the backing. This is our third solder, so we will now go to soft. Now I'm going to keep this with me just in case I need to get a little bit more in there, but we should be all right. So you want to make sure this heated in this area over here, the base, because if I put the flame on here immediately, it's just going to heat up this little bit of wire, the loop, and we don't want it to do that. We want it to... Okay, so we're going to heat up everything equally. And the solder just disappeared. We're going to press down on this a little bit. Okay, got it. And you can physically see the solder flowing. So we have a nice loop in there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut a nice bail, it's called. That's the neat thing about handmade jewelry too. There is no wrong way or right way. Okay, I'm going to grind that down real quick, and we'll show you when I'm going to file down this bale. And one side is a little bit longer and thinner than the other, and you kind of want that so that when we go to insert it, it fits better. So we want to put a stamp on it. We want to know which way we're going to make a loop out of this. And this is going to be the back side. So I'm going to put my 925 stamp where it's out of the way. And now we're going to anneal it real quick, make it soft. You want to get a nice rosy red color. That loosens up all the molecules. Now, we're going to put a little bend in this. And then we're going to wrap it around. So the two ends meet. All right, so we want to make sure that these two meet now. You do not want the wire loop touching if you can avoid it, to get as far away from that heat as possible. So we're going to put a little dab of solder in there, soft solder. And I mark every one of my solders with S, M, or H for the hardness, because you do not want to mess that up. You'll end up melting a bunch of stuff. So we're just going to close this bale with a little bit of solder, taking care to not get the little bit of silver loop wire too hot. A little bit of filing and we'll be done. Okay, so we finished up polishing, sanding, and making sure everything's smooth edges. We now have a bale that's large enough that you can fit a nice chain through. Okay, we got to clean up all this ugliness. That is called scale, and it's from the heat and the flux, and it just discolors everything. So we're going to put it in the hydrochloric acid bath, and depending upon how hot it is how long it takes. So we'll get back to you in just a minute. Okay, we're going to, it's been about 15 minutes. And remember, this is hydrochloric acid, so you don't want to put your fingers in there. So it's taken 90% of it off. If I'd left it overnight, then it would become a little bit cleaner, but this is good enough for what we need. We're going to go set the stone now. So we go another one of our burnishing tools, and we go over the inside, and we make sure this bezel wire is leaning out a little bit. It makes the stone go in so much easier. Now, some people will put glue in here. I don't like to do that. I cut it so I know it's not going to fall out. But if you ever have your stone, for whatever reason, it cracks or something like that, the glue just makes it so much more difficult to work with it. Okay, so we're almost there, but it needs just a little trim work. So all I do go around the edge of it, because sometimes a little bit of the two-part epoxy is still around the edges. So we check this out. Okay, now that's going to fit. So I put it down. You don't want to go too hard, so I can put it down just with finger pressure. And I have some soft pliers. And I just make sure that it's seated very well. Another benefit to putting the two-part epoxy on the backing is it gives us a very smooth, level back. If you have any deformations in there whatsoever and you put pressure on it, boom, your stone gets cracked. So now we're going to bend the bezel. You always start at your tightest place, which is the point, and we just bend it in a little bit at a time. You're physically bending that metal, and you want to be careful that you don't put a crimp in the metal. So you get that rounded, and now you're going to work your way around, but we started the other curve. You don't have to grab it all at one time. And it takes a bit of pressure sometimes, but don't get in a hurry. Use slow, even pressure to bend the bezel over the shoulder of the stone that we created. We've got a little bit right in there. And we have a little bit right in here. So we're going to do something that you would think is unthinkable. We're going to beat it with a hammer. So I use double-sided sticky tape here. It's like my third hand. Keeps it from sliding. And this point, I want to flatten that silver out just a little bit. Doesn't take much pressure. And if you do put much pressure on it, you're going to break that stone. That stone will never ever come out. All the metal is wrapped over and it is sturdy. Now we go to buffing. Just a simple little buffing wheel, 4 inches. I use 2 different types. There's probably 7 or 8 different types of rouge. It's basically wax with an abrasive built in. And you want your wheel nice and soft and fluffy. I have to replace this one. It's a little bit hard, but it'll still work. And I use a red rouge. And what this does, the aggregate that's in there, the abrasive, it actually will take out the scratches. And I'm using 600 grit for my final sanding. This will take out up to 8,000 grit. So it's the final step and here. So we always want to, the wax does the job, not the wheel. So just to show you real quick, that little bit polishes up. The other wheel will make it shiny. I'm making it smooth. You want to go over every edge so nothing is sharp. You'll be wearing this next to your body. So we've already gone through the red rouge and I'm finishing it up with white, which gives it a little higher luster. And voila, there's our finished product. That'll hang from a chain very nicely. And there you go. That's how you mount a stone. If you have anything you'd like to see me demonstrate in the future, I'd be more than happy to do it. I just sit out here in my shop and do my thing, and if you want me to stick a camera up and see what I do, I'd be happy to do it. So thanks for visiting, and I hope you enjoyed it. Comments are very appreciated. And remember my Facebook page at Hog Creek Jewelry. Yeah, that's the name of it, at Hog Creek Jewelry on Facebook. So you can contact me there. It has all my information for my webpage, or it's given my email. And come to one of my shows, buy some of my trinkets. You all have a good day now. Bye.